from the News Channel 5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you are with us tonight. We are talking politics tonight. I love talking politics, and it's a fascinating topic. The Hispanic community will be a critical voting bloc in the midterm elections and certainly in the next presidential election. It is one that is discussed often as, you know, how will it vote? And it's tough to pin down. And so we're gonna talk about how the Hispanic community may vote here in Tennessee, across the country. And of course, encourage you to call in with your questions or comments. We have with us Reverend Tommy Vallejos, joining us via Zoom, as all of our guests do. He is chairman of Latinos for Tennessee. He was the first Hispanic elected county commissioner in the entire state of Tennessee, up in Montgomery County. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That is in 2010. Back in
2010. And your history is remarkable, but I want to get into that. But let's talk big picture first. Latinos for Tennessee. What is Latinos for Tennessee?
Well, you know, Latinos for Tennessee are like-minded Hispanics that have values that are conservative. We stand on family, faith, freedom, and physical responsibility. We're trying to bring folks together back several years back, about 8 years. And of course, during that time, we were trying to find a name, and we brought Hispanics from across the state, and one of those that happened to be here was Alberto Gonzalez, the former Attorney General of the United States, the first Hispanic Attorney General. And as we tossed names back and forth, he suggested Latinos for Tennessee, and we bid upon it, and that's what we've been. And so now we have representation in East Tennessee, all the way in Knoxville, Chattanooga, Memphis, here in Nashville, and of course and throughout Middle Tennessee, and of course in Clarksville. And I am the chairman, and we go and educate, working with local churches. We do many things, and of course we'll talk about that. One of the things we were just headlining on was the governor's COVID task force. We were every Sunday, you know, for almost a year, working with the governor's task force and General Bauer and his team. We would set up churches, Hispanic churches, to do testing. And so our organization works in manyfold to educate, to empower the Latino community, register votes. And so we do a lot of that. We also have an organization that's part of us that reaches out to the business community and just espousing our values and who we are as Americans.
So, all right, I ask you to define, you know, Latinos for Tennessee. More conservative organization, but I'm fascinated by all of that. Now, let me ask you this. How do you define Latinos? Define who are Latinos? When we're talking about the Latino vote, who are we talking about?
Well, as you know, the census gives us two different questions, Hispanic or Latinos. And so most of people of Hispanic descent I'll go with the name of Latino from South America, Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean, and so all of us, you know, have that rich. The commonality is our language. Our cultures are totally different, and so often our political views. But the landscape has been changing drastically, and so as a Latino, we wanted to make sure that our voice was heard. Although when we started, we were a much smaller portion of the population of Tennessee, but growing across the nation at over 60 million.
Growing, no doubt about it. So what would you say, and I might know what you might say, but are Latinos moving more? It's a hard voting block to pin down, right? I mean, there's no question about that.
We're definitely not monolithic.
You're not monolithic. And people think, you're going to vote one way or you're going to vote another way, and that's not been happening.
No. Well, I think for a set period of time. I mean, I grew up. My mother said we were all Democrats, and so you know we were Democrats. But for me, I entered the military, and I love what Ronald Reagan had to say, and he became my first president I ever voted for. My mom chewed me out. I remember, what are you doing? And I remember voting for him, and I voted because I love what he had to say. I love the strong military, and my views and my values began to change through the military. I never valued the American flag. You know, I always waved a Mexican flag, even though I was never born in Mexico. I was raised in New Mexico, no passport required, and ended up joining the military to get out and go into prison. And through the military, I found patriotism and found the value of who I am. And so when you talk about Latinos voting, for years they were generally on one side, the bigger portion. But during down the years, Ronald Reagan changed that, and then George Senior did, but George W. did something unique. He got 45% nationwide of the Hispanic vote because of his ties to Texas, Midland, Texas. He was in the oil industry, lived there, and baseball, everything you can think about in Texas. And so he drew in a lot of Latinos. And so then years later, of course, Obama drew it in. And then, of course, but yet we were still voting for McCain and others. But we've always haven't been sold out. In the past 20 years, there's been a great shift.
There's been a great shift. And so then that brings us to President Trump, who has said some tough things. He's been, criticized for attacking immigrants. He called Mexicans some bad stuff back in 2015, criminals, rapists. And so and Latinos certainly have overlooked that. Why do you think they voted for Trump, not in the numbers they did for George W. Bush, but they certainly voted for Trump in some numbers, despite some of the things he said?
Well, let me just first say that when he meant that, I didn't feel offended personally. I tell you what, I was raised in gangs. I was raised in the drug culture, and I dealt growing up, with drugs crossing the border. I've seen some of the things that have happened. So I am a product of that environment, and so when I hear that, I could see why people get offended. But for me, I understood where he was coming from. And he wasn't talking, when they tell me Mexicans, well, I just happen to be a Mexican, but I'm born and raised in this great country we call America. So people voted for him because of several reasons. When you think about this, a county called Zapata County in Texas, 98% Hispanic, for the first time in a century, voted Republican. How does that happen? How does Southern Texas do? How does Southern Florida do? How does Arizona and Nevada and large numbers around the region suddenly turn to Trump and end up voting for him in high numbers? Because folks like myself start educating and say, hey, you truly at heart are a conservative. You are against abortion. You value traditional marriage. Your strong culture in family and upbringing is so important. But also, we got a hard work ethic. And Trump espoused all that. And there's something about Trump that all of us drew to, and that was about America. He drew us there. I myself was a Ted Cruz delegate. I was on our state ballot has a delegate, but when I came, people couldn't understand that. But he drew me in, and just like my sister, who had been a Democrat her whole life in New Mexico, she voted for Trump because she seen something different, and she seen the direction of our country. So when you say that it's the direction of our country, why so many Latinos voted for Trump.
Direction of the country. Social issues then are very important with Latinos. A lot are religious, right? And so social issues are very important. So abortion, and you said traditional marriage. Then on the other side, what about immigration? Are they concerned where the Republican Party or where Trump, now I guess we can move to the Republican Party, is on immigration?
Well, let's put it this way. I think all of us are concerned, and even more so now. If you look at the recent polls, there was a recent poll that came out in the past few weeks by Wall Street, by Equitas, several organizations that do these polls, and the numbers are startling. If you were to vote today for Trump or for Biden, they're split right down the middle. If you were to vote for a Republican House or Senate House, or it would be leaning towards Republican. Now, while we're concerned for immigration, suddenly these polls has come out and showed that immigration is no longer at the top. Our concern is COVID and the economy, healthcare, education, and it seems like immigration has been pushed further down because our borders are turned into an open border. And and here's the thing about it. You mentioned immigration. You would think that the Hispanics on the border of Mexico and Texas, who have always said, this is where we were born and raised generation after generation. You think they would say, let them come, but they're the one who are saying, build the wall. We need to protect the way of life because it won't be that way. And so you think about that. Immigration still concerns us. I am not for a amnesty. I'm born and raised here. My mother's born and raised here. My grandmother's born and raised here. Her grandparents, my grandma was born in Valentine, Texas. Her parents were born in West Texas. So we value immigration, and people take it for granted. You mentioned something very powerful. My son right now, as I speak to you, is in Germany trying to get his wife here. And he's been married for over 2 years and still hasn't been able legally. And here he is. He said, Dad, you taught us to do everything right, but yet I can't even get my wife here. So
why can't he get his wife here?
Well, it takes a process. Like anything, you got to go through the process, interviews. He's been married to her for 2 years. And so, but I appreciate, I know I've reached out to Senator Blackburn, who's a great friend of ours, and she is trying to do everything they can because he's there trying to get his wife. But COVID shut everything down and it pushed everything back. And of course, with the election, these thousands upon thousands illegally came to the country. And here my son is in Germany today, as I speak, trying to bring his wife legally.
There was a time, I think it was right after George W. Bush, where he did win a lot of the Latino vote. You said it was 45%. It was a large number. He did really well with Latinos. Then that was, what was it, Karl Rove? And there were some in the Republican Party that were like, this is the group we need to reach out to. And,
yes.
And so there was this effort. Then it seemed like there was concern that that wasn't happening, I guess, as things went on. Where do you think things are now? I mean, do you think it is possible for the Latino vote to vote pretty much as one voting bloc like we see with some minority groups, or is it going to be divided? What do you think?
Well, I think there's going to be a split. I really think there's a split because here's what you got to understand about Hispanics or Latinos, as we call them. You got the largest of the group is our Mexican Americans. Then you got the next. Then you got the Puerto Ricans. Then you got the Cubans. Then you got the Central Americans and all the other groups that fall into it. And for the most part, Cubans have been a sold-out group of the largest portion that have voted normally Republican. They understand the cause and the pain of communism. But now we got these groups that are coming from South America and Central America, and they understand socialism, from Nicaragua and their president Daniel Ortega, and the government of socialism down in Venezuela, and Chavez, who's now gone on, and Maduro, who's now the president. So their economy have been devastated. And then you got the Puerto Ricans. So you look at Florida and how Trump was able to win that over. And when you look at the polls, you'll notice that many of them the concern is socialism. So here's what's going to happen on this new election coming up on the midterm. You're going to see blocks of Hispanics who are the swing vote or the independent vote, because you got Hispanics like myself that are conservative, but then you got a block of independent and swing voters that are becoming swing voters, along with the Democrat, who are now voting differently because they see the chaos in our country, the chaos of our withdrawal in Afghanistan. See, here's what I want our listeners to know, that we're concerned not just about immigration, we're concerned about our economy, we're concerned about China, we're concerned about our military. And so we are on the move, but we're also on the move about our nation. And so that's why you're seeing all this block of swing voters changing. People that voted for Biden are no longer going to vote for Biden because of the chaotic. During this poll.
If you talk about chaos, certainly Afghanistan, there was chaos there, but there was chaos on January 6th. And that was primarily Trump voters. And if they've seen chaos in these other countries, they must have been appalled by what they saw at the Capitol on January 6th. And so does that factor into, and I know you're coming from one side, but how much does that hurt the argument that you've just put forward?
None at all. Poll after poll. I had looked at some the recent poll that came out, and I wrote this down. What are Latinos concerned about? And the large minority of Democratic Hispanics that voted are concerned with the Democratic Party turning to socialism. We can see, thank God for Senator Joe Manchin, that he didn't allow this monstrosity of a bill to set us back where our great-grandchildren would be voting, paying for the taxes. So they're not, as you say, they see what's going on. But can I tell you, there are still folks waving their Trump flag. And although Trump has been out of the picture, they're seeing the chaos. I think Joe Biden has done us all a favor. He has done us all a favor. I pray for him. I'm a pastor. My first thing is to pray for him, because if he loses, we lose. But at the same time, I understand his values are not my values. And so Latinos across the board are realizing the rise of socialism within the Democratic Party itself is endangering the future of our military, our healthcare, our education. That's why you had all these mothers up in arms in Virginia. Virginia and New Jersey are a great example of what's happening and how there's a storm brewing and how valuable the Latino vote. 53% of Latinos in Virginia voted for Youngkin. I mean, just think about it. And you got your first African-American lieutenant governor and a Cuban attorney general. The tide is changing.
All right, we have to take a break. That kind of sets the table for the discussion. If you want to call in, there is the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. So we'll take a break, come back after this with your calls.